This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. And sometimes the amount of stories that make their way to us means that we simply can't cover everything that comes our way. But from time to time, a story just stays with me, and I feel compelled to share it with you and give you my thoughts. And now, one more thing.
I got one more thing I'd like to talk to you about right now.
Okay, I came across something recently that I felt I was going to need to talk about. And for those that know Q Ward, he and I had a conversation back and forth about a letter that was published in several media articles about former President Obama. And I'm not sure if folks were trying to sensationalize the letter or what they were trying to do. Who knows? But I felt like it required not a defense, but some sort of critical examination. And after going back and forth with Q and with our producer, Chris Thompson, we felt like maybe while we could offer some sort of framework for a conversation, we really couldn't give as much insight as we would like. Now, what I'm going to do is explain exactly what happened with the letter, and then I'm going to introduce a very special guest that we have on the show with us today. So I'll read from the New York Post. Former President Barack Obama wrote of his own androgynous mind and, quote, making love to men daily, but in the imagination, unquote, according to the redacted portion of a now notorious 1982 letter obtained by the Post. The more than 40-year-old letter to an ex-girlfriend recently resurfaced after Obama biographer David Garrow gave a long and winding interview on the one-time commander-in-chief. In regard to homosexuality, I must say I believe this is an attempt to remove oneself from the present, a refusal to perhaps perpetuate the endless farce of earthly life. You see, I make love to men daily, but in the imagination, Obama, then 21, wrote to Alex McNear in November 1982. So, as I mentioned, a lot of people had a lot to say about Obama at one point, questioning and learning more about himself and indeed his sexuality. So as I mentioned, today we have a very special guest. Today's guest is Johnny Jenkins, who is a recent graduate of Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation's master's program with a degree in social justice. His thesis focused on theorizing Black queer community wisdom in Detroit. And again, I'd like to welcome you to the show. So how are you doing today?
I'm blessed, Ramses. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, first things first, that brief introduction doesn't really do you justice. So let's get the people acquainted with who you are and why you're passionate about, queer issues, particularly those that affect, Black people and reflect Black life in America.
I think the thing that defines me most and defines my path in scholarship, research, and activism is me growing up in Detroit.
Okay.
And not identifying as queer as a youth, but knowing that there was something queer about me.
Okay.
In terms of my sexuality and my attractionality to men. Always maintaining an attraction to both, but my attraction to men was always more pronounced.
Okay.
The spaces that I had to explore that were all personal. There were no programs or institutions or even individuals that I had access to be able to explore that in a free and open way. So, I suffered from imposter syndrome, trying to perform as a Black, straight, heterosexual male.
Okay.
And that failed at every attempt.
Sure.
Played football, all the stereotypical male masculine things you're expected to do.
Sure.
I performed in high school, and even in college. And then, when I got freedom after college, that's when I came out, and that was in 1992.
Yeah.
And, or actually not, 1992. And, when I came out, I didn't have any other tools to perform outside of my authentic self. So all of a sudden I'm out in the world, and, I'm back in Detroit, my hometown, after going to school in Kalamazoo for 5 years. It's like, okay, now there's nothing holding me back from exploring this. Mm-hmm. And, I got exposed to, a culture of Black gay men in Detroit, which soon as I connected to it, it felt like it was home.
Okay, good.
I felt like this is the space this was my tribe, right? Mm-hmm. So I fully engaged and disconnected from girlfriends, women I was dating and so forth, and just leaned in entirely. And, at that time, I didn't know I was leaning into a culture that was being devastated by HIV and AIDS. Okay. I'd end up making friends, and then they will have died 2 weeks later.
Wow.
So for me, there was no turning back. I think anybody else would have, once they would have realized what they were exposing themselves to, they would have, totally retracted, pulled out, and say, I'm not having any parts of it. I leaned into it because that freedom that I felt, it was almost like taking crack.
Yeah.
You get that one fantasy or that one fantastic moment, and then you're forever chasing that one fantastic moment.
Very good.
And, it in a lot of ways, it's that. And for me, I decided that I couldn't turn back and, deny my authenticity. So I leaned into it, started dating dudes, getting involved in the culture, and, not really internalizing the scope and the magnitude of what I was in, mm-hmm. but the networks and the kinships that I connected to, men and women, mm-hmm. who identified as lesbians, same gender loving, and so forth, were engaged in community to protect, serve, and build up each other.
Yeah.
Right. So, not knowing that's what was happening at the time, that's what I was connecting to. And, there was a Black gay male support group that met every Tuesday in this Episcopal church in Detroit. And, there were 50 Black gay men meeting there every Tuesday, outside of all the Black gay male clubs that were happening throughout the week. So there was just a lot of, and it was all underground. It was like going to a rave party. I used to be a rave kid. So, at the raves, I was looking for Black gay men like me, but it was all white kids. Yeah. But I was still going to them because I saw a few Black men, gay men splattered amongst.
And I'm sure that just the community and the fellowship matters a lot.
Yeah. So, and then I went to an all-white high school. I grew up in a predominantly white community in Detroit.
Really?
Yeah, Detroit's a really dynamic city. That's another conversation altogether. But yeah. And so coming back from college, where I did everything pretty much white, mm-hmm. joined a white fraternity, I didn't join a Black fraternity, but I got this juxtaposition against white community, the white construct. And then I grew up in a Black church where I had the Black construct, and all of a sudden I'm exposed to this queer construct just that is Black, mm-hmm. and not white. And I always had negative stereotypes about white gay culture. Okay. So it really just kind of turned me off. But when I met this group of Black gay men in this club and in this social gathering space, there was instant connectivity. So I become an activist of, try to mitigate my friends dying from HIV and AIDS. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of other people doing that, lesbians and gay men doing the same thing. So we're creating community as activists to mitigate harm from racism, from homophobia, from white people and from Black people, and we getting it from all ends. Plus we have a deadly disease that's taking out Black gay men. Yeah. So it's hard not to build community when you're in this space like that. So for me, I ended up making a long story short, I ended up, having lead roles and positions in community projects, a Black queer community magazine was formed called Kick. I was the marketing manager for that because I just came out of college with an advertising degree. The support group that was there, I ended up being the board president, and we were in this position where we're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars to identify and support Black gay men and men sleeping with men who'd be exposed to HIV and AIDS.
Okay.
And then from there, I co-founded one of the first Black gay prides in the country called Hotter Than July.
Really?
In Detroit, called Hotter Than July. It's still going on today, 25, 26 years later.
Fantastic.
And it's continuing to build community. And I spent its first 11 years as a co-founder and president and lead organizer.
Okay.
So, I got this ass backwards way of getting into social justice and community organizing just by experience.
Yeah.
And being engaged.
You're tapping into it.
Yeah,
you're trying.
It was also a part of my coming out process.
Okay.
So, I'm in the news. I'm on TV stations having interviews, and here I am with my dad's name because I'm a junior, and he's connected to everything. And I never came out to him. Well, I didn't come out to him until later that I was gay. He said, "Boy, I knew the whole time." People were bringing me articles like, "That's Pete," my nickname, my family nickname. "That's Pete, ain't it?" He said, "Yeah, that's my boy."
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally told him, he said, "I was just waiting for you to tell me." I knew, I saw the articles. When it came to me, I knew gay people that probably could have helped you. And I just had to own it. I said, "Dad, I wasn't ready to engage you in that because I had come up with all these masculine performing things, like having that conversation with my dad. It just didn't seem reasonable." And I think that part ties into some of the Obama stuff. If you want to segue into that conversation. That's my story. That's where I come from.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's actually what I was thinking. Obviously this is the first time I've heard the story myself, but I believe there's something to be said about coming to terms with gender roles, not necessarily sexuality, but coming to terms with gender roles. This is something that everyone can relate to, I believe. As we mature, as we turn into the version of ourselves that we ultimately will become, we have to go from being a child to a man or a woman in most cases, right?
In the traditional sense. Yes.
In the traditional sense, right? In most cases. So, going from a boy to a man, we have to learn and, in theory, espouse the framework of masculinity and find out how we fit into that framework.
Yeah.
The same holds true for the traditional role of a child becoming a woman, a female child becoming a woman. So again, that's something that I believe we all have to come to terms with at some point. It's a part of maturing and becoming who we will ultimately become as an adult. But
it's the construct we operate in.
Right. Exactly. But there is something else that I'm learning increasingly is more prevalent and more prominent, but I myself did not have this experience. And, my, collaborator for this show, I guess we'd call him the co-producer for today's episode. He himself did not have the experience either. And that experience is coming to terms with our sexuality. Now, again, because this is something that is not uncommon, I feel like we might be in the minority. In other words, there was never a time when I questioned my own sexuality. There was never a time when Q questioned his own sexuality. It was just kind of like, okay, that's what we do according to the gender norms and the traditional kind of roles, becoming a boy to a man. And then everything just kind of fell into place and it felt right. And there was never anything to question. But like I said, I believe that our experience is probably less common than I would have ever anticipated. In other words, most people go through, well, maybe not most, but a good number of people, I'll say it that way. A good number of people will really press their beliefs as they're maturing. Really, is this really who I am? And I believe your story kind of reflects at least some of that experience. So, when Obama says that he makes love to men in the mind, and that he's,
his imaginaries.
Right. Do you feel like, well, first, do you feel like that is something that is commonplace, especially in your travels?
I do.
Okay.
Imaginaries aren't reality.
Okay.
And they don't define you. They're possibilities.
Sure.
They're not a promise of anything.
Okay.
When things are in alignment and you're in that privileged space where you don't have to explore and you don't have to question,
like me and you,
right? You can lean into it, and like this, it is the construct was built for you.
Right, exactly.
So it's natural. It feels natural. You can perform in it naturally, and you don't feel like an outsider performing in it. For others, whatever percentage that is, because I'm not a quantitative researcher. I'm more qualitative and ethnographic, right?
Okay.
But for those who think more queerly and able to think outside of the box, when they're trying to reconcile what's not quite in alignment, like damn, Ramses and Q are so confident in their sexuality, like they're 100% masculine, men, no question about it whatsoever. And I'm sitting up here questioning, what the hell does that mean? And I got to answer these questions for myself, and I can try to hide them. I can try to push them down, but all of that it comes out differently for different people.
Yeah.
So, some people that create self-help, some people who are really inquisitive will lean into it, and some people will just resist. And there's impact with every decision made in terms of what route you're going to go. So for me as an activist coming out the way that I did, and the people that I meet along the way, who I meet straight guys all the time who are really dear friends, and they'll tell me, Johnny, man, you're the coolest cat, that I've met, and you happen to be gay. And, if I got down like that, me and you would be on and popping. But, I don't get down like that, but we still cool.
Yeah.
And I'm that type of cat that with the way that I came up, especially like we can play football and I can be queer and I'm not going to hit on you. I'm not even attracted to you. And even if I am, it's inappropriate because that's not where you at.
Sure.
But, and then I know a couple of cats that I befriended back in Detroit decades ago. They say like, man, if I did get down like that way, it would be you because we got that connection creatively.
Yeah.
And we think alike on a lot of different levels. I'm just attracted to females.
Two human beings aligned. I'm not mad at that.
Yeah.
I think there's something else here too. So first off, the reason why I explain this, for the benefit of our listeners, the reason why I explain this and we'll call it linear path toward my adult sexuality and sexual orientation, is because I felt like me giving any sort of explanation, or context to Obama's letter would be at best inauthentic. At best, I have not myself gone through this, moment in life where I, am questioning anything, not necessarily questioning, but exploring anything. Right?
Somebody else thinks differently. It's a curious path and that I'm unfamiliar with.
Right.
And that makes for an intriguing story, right?
Right. Exactly.
So why was Obama thinking that way? And the way that he talks about it, imaginaries, like, all right, man, you had enough freedom to have those imaginaries to fully and completely understand yourself. I mean, when you read the whole context of the letter and his state of mind during that time, because I read up a little bit what they had on the Emory University site where, abstracts from the paper are there. It was, he's defining himself and he understands things on a whole nother level politically because that's who he is, right? And he's contextualizing his sexuality and in that. And as a politician, you almost have to because your sexuality is going to come up to question to begin with. So you may as well understand that before you get into it.
Sure.
So that you can rebuff, embrace, or engage, whatever. So, for him, I think just being able to think like that, says a lot about his capacity to do it, understand it, contextualize it, and move on. Most of us don't have that space. And even you are fully aligned. Being curious don't make you gay. It makes you curious about our humanity and how we connect with each other.
And that's another thing that I wanted to kind of ponder with you. My guess is that, okay, let me start here. You mentioned that you have friends that say, hey, we as humans aren't aligned. If my sexual orientation was that way, you would definitely be a candidate, right? This is an experience that you had. Myself, the way that I found myself saying that when I've been approached by people who are gay and we don't have the same sexual orientation. A thing that I found myself saying over the years is, hey, you know what? Maybe in another lifetime. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I see that you're a good person. You know what I mean? I cannot give to you what it is that you're able to give to me. Maybe in another lifetime. And there's a sense of grace there. It's not a violent reaction or repudiation or rejection or anything, right?
Not judgment.
Judgment, exactly. So I wanted to ponder this with you. I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that people who perhaps have the capacity to imagine a version of themselves that dresses differently, that loves differently, that worships differently, that whatever's differently, they might have an increased capacity for empathy and might be, in my opinion, a better human being, able to be a better brother or sister to those human beings around them or those human beings in their sphere of influence. What are your thoughts?
If we allowed for space for that, that would be ideal and perfect.
Okay.
We don't allow space for that.
Oof.
And when we do allow space for it, and I'm talking more broadly, and this is not everybody, but I'm generalizing here. When we don't create space, when we provide conditions for it, it looks like, well, you know, Uncle Gay, but we ain't gonna talk about it, but we know he is.
Okay.
We're gonna lean on him maybe to babysit or to take care of moms.
Yeah.
When she needs to care and I got a family and children to take care of. Maybe I'll just lean on gay uncle, you know, Tyrone,
sure,
or lesbian, you know, we rely on, these differences to undergird our families, our associations, and the construct in general, but then we don't create space for it to thrive.
Gotcha.
We, as a society, we pick from it what benefits us at the time, and then when we need to demonize it, weaponize it for whatever reason, then that's one of the first things that we will turn to. And then instantaneously, what happens? You find LGBT youth, especially Black LGBTQI plus identified youth, being out on the streets. Those youth who are questioning and exploring their gender role specifically, and they express and feel as their femininity to a level where they want to express, and that's the only way they feel comfortable. There's no space to do that without them walking the streets and being murdered, because now they have to do sex work to make a living because their own families have disposed of them. Black community has disposed of them, and now they're on the margins.
Yeah.
And, you know, Bell Hooks, who is a Black feminist scholar who died last year, she spoke a lot about people on the margins and Black queer people on the margins. Black queer thinking is on the margins, even more marginalized than just queer thinking. Gay marriage was never about Black queer people.
Yeah.
Overall, we could really care less about gay marriage because we had other issues. Our pressing issues, racism and economics in the 90s and the 2000s. But the white gay marriage movement, the funders are all white gay men. So that's the priority.
Yeah.
So
Dave Chappelle actually mentioned something like that in the specials.
They get married. They feel more heteronormative. And, but they don't focus on anything that's related to racism and what that looks like within queer community. Hence, Black queer wisdom that I've been theorizing about is more about that abstract sense of community that I tapped into when I kind of come full circle, right?
Yeah.
That I tapped into unbeknownst to me. I found two things that made me feel at home. those pathways ain't for everybody, but I just happened to have found mine, and it's led me down this direction. What happens when we reimagine the construct and take that wisdom and that learning that I did, look at those pathways, see how they existed and how they were formed to create that safe space for me to be invited to where I really needed to be.
Sure.
And I got there. So my scholarship is really about creating space for those. And now I'm at the point of, in this current moment, that happens within Black queer community for us to find and protect our own.
Got it.
But Black people need that, right?
Sure.
So if Black queer people in community are doing this out of survivance, and they got all of these external variables that are detrimental to their lives, and they still thrive and find joy, we're going to find Black radical joy. Then I argue that Black queer community is where you find Black radical joy and models thereof that inform the larger movement around Blackness.
Okay. I want to add to that. In 2020, there was all of the protests out on the streets, and there was obviously the Black Lives Matter movement, but there was some, I don't want to call them secondary movements because that implies that they're somehow lesser, but less pronounced, less prominent, at least insofar as the media is concerned, movements that they operated in tandem with the Black Lives Matter movement. Yeah. Those included Black trans lives.
Black trans lives.
And there was another one, and it escapes me right now, but I do know, at least where I was engaging in my activism, it was a queer femme-led organization. And they were the radical enough thinkers. They were the bold enough individuals to, and I suspect it's because they're challenged at these particular women that I was following. They were challenged at different levels. First off, they were Black. Second of all, they were female. Third off, they were queer. And so they were accustomed to being challenged, and they knew how to push back. And everyone that needed organization and needed to know where to be and how to act fell in line. Yeah. And I've never seen anything like it. It was spectacular. And so I think there's some merit to what you're saying about looking in a Black queer space to find out strategy, leadership, and to get that sense of empowerment and encouragement.
And all of that, I just want to call out Black feminism and Black feminists.
Sure.
Black feminists and Black lesbians specifically started the Black Lives hashtag.
Oh yeah. And 2012 with Trayvon.
And lead the movement and all of that, right? But that work didn't start there. Black feminists have been doing it.
Oh yeah, Angela Davis, and even before then,
And Bell Hooks and poets like Pat Parker, Audre Lorde, who wasn't even a scholar, but she thought so queerly and outside the lines that her experiences put her at the same level as scholars, right? And that's Black feminism.
Yeah.
And if you got somebody like that people are referencing who didn't come from the academy.
Scholars study them.
That's magic.
Exactly.
We always talk about magic and we think about esoteric. No, it's about energy and conjuring from nothing. And Black feminists do that constantly because of just the patriarchal nature of the construct that we operate in. And even when it's just, they're in settings where it's just focused on feminism and women, they still have to worry about white feminists.
Yeah.
And they weren't the priority in the feminist movement.
Right.
The white feminist leaders really just wanted them for performance. They didn't want them to have any insights on what they're saying. And even in the academy, Black feminists are fighting for the legitimacy of experiential knowledge as opposed to scientific knowledge. But culturally, scientific knowledge is more Western European. They tried to destroy magic and the spirituality that we had to bring to offer. And I think some of this is about figuring out how do we get back to what Blackness really is. It's magic on a whole bunch of different levels. That word popping up out of nowhere is not it's not happenstance.
Yeah. Okay.
It's that we're supposed to be getting back to. So I feel like Black queer community is a major part of defining some of those answers. And for me, it's about making sure we're at those tables.
Gotcha.
And actually those tables ain't happening right now, but that's another conversation because they're not talking like that in the rooms and spaces that need to be happening. Not even Black Lives Matter is creating this, but I will say this, and then I'll shut up. Your last video about the Montgomery Brawl.
Yeah.
I think you were spot on in your instincts about collective solidarity because that's what I've been posting on my social media. I spy collective solidarity. Maybe even more deeply than Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter, everybody attached themselves to it. So your instincts are on. But now we need something for us. That brawl was for us. Like I watched that video so many different times. I don't like watching violent stuff either. But then I'm catching different dynamics of it. I'm really like watching it like, man, those white people thought they were going to get on that boat, beat his ass and walk away and get away with it. That tells you the level of privilege that they thought they could just do that. And they're surrounded by Black people. Yeah. What the hell? Yeah. If we don't respond to it the way that we've been responding to it, that's a bigger question. Sure. I'm actually excited to the extent that shows me that we're picking up on something and it's magic. So what do we do with it? Now we know, like, no, you're not going to do that. We've drawn a line in the sand and people recognize that. So now what's next? How do we strategize about getting to what's next? That's that Black radical joy, right? Yeah. Black radical joy feels like looking at that moment and saying, yeah, I might go to hell looking at this and feeling the way that I feel. But in terms of Blackness and cultivating it within this construct and trying to figure out how to neutralize and get rid of anti-Blackness, we may just need more of what that had to offer.
You know, I'll add to that. There's was it Dr. King that said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice? I would infer from a statement like that a reckoning will be in order ultimately for anything that has been wrong for any amount of time. And in this country, especially those of us that are informed, but really those of us that experience it, even if we're not informed, we recognize that maybe on a cellular level or spiritual level, that there's something wrong. Those of us in the know, we've done the research. We're aware, right, of the injustices, systemic and otherwise. But when a moment like that comes about and you get to see a little bit of justice, a little, you know, and you get to see a little bit of strength and solidarity and you see, it's almost like seeing like a David versus Goliath moment. Yeah. And where you're going into it and you don't expect this to be the outcome. Yeah. And when you see it, it feels a little bit more special. It's one thing if, you know, I did this to you, you did this to me. Okay, we both got ours and we go our separate ways. Yeah. But I believe that moment was almost like the culmination of the 2020 protests and then the subsequent trials and then the stuff with Kyle Rittenhouse shooting people in the streets and all the deaths in Atlanta. And then a bunch of like, you know, the mass shootings in New York with the grocery store and Black communities and on and on and on.
Things have been ratcheting up.
Yeah, exactly.
Since the pandemic waned.
And then, for people to press for action and for people to press, Black people to press for change and to point, listen, here's the videos. You can see it happening. And for the most part, there's been no real change. There's a strong enough opposition, or let me say not strong enough, a well-organized enough opposition to hinder us from achieving something that is equal, forget equitable, and to have that moment come about where it's like, okay, now we have to show what we're capable of. Now we have to show, that was a very, very tiny display. I will cede that entirely. But
it was a small
for Black people, it was a moment that felt a little special. Like, yo, this is not right. And we can't just, all right, let the police come handle it, because we know how that's going to go. And so, listen, we're going to get off this boat. We're going to swim over there. We're going to get busy right now. We're going to let you know this is not going to fly. And so, while I'm like you, I'm a passive. I don't like violence. I don't like I said on that episode, most I'll watch is like a boxing match at best. I don't like it just doesn't, it's like seeing people torture animals. It just doesn't move me. But that moment, I can recognize how special that moment was for Black people that have been just exhausted, especially this modern group in our age range and younger.
And the snapback that's happening, because it's no different than what happened during Reconstruction. It's a playbook that has history behind it, and it works. So this is the reaction to Black Lives Matter, and it's a global influence, right? So that's why I say Black Lives Matter. It has its limitations, and it's not thinking about possibilities and how to take that moment and advance it. And they might not be able to, like the NAACP can't advance.
Yes, there's certain things that exist in certain spaces and roles, and that's fair. So moments like that push the culture forward.
And there are moments for us to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if we practice the learnings that we have, all those advancements during Reconstruction, politically and so forth. Pretty much all they had to do was start bombing our cities, lynching our people, and conservatives legislating things from the psyche of who they are onto us.
They're based on their sensibilities, their values. Exactly.
So us and indigenous people, you might be you can create a certain amount of wealth, but you can't get too far. Now you're getting ahead of yourselves. So what do you do for Blackness? Right. That's, for me, like, I'm beyond that. Like, the construct, until it implodes, how do Black people protect ourselves and prepare ourselves for the next system that's going to be built? Or do we think more broadly and think about Blackness? Because anti-Blackness is global.
Yeah.
So maybe it's our opportunity to really start thinking about, all right, what do we really need to build legitimate ties back to our brothers and sisters in Africa. And if we're not going to be there physically, how spiritually can all of us connect that we're all responding the same way to a Montgomery brawl and so forth? And I think Pan-Africanism needs to be reimagined.
There's a name I want you to remember, and for our listeners, Vincent Berry II is one such individual making inroads, creating some connective tissue between Black Americans and Black Africans, economic inroads, to facilitate Black exchange between, those of us here in this country and, our, African brothers and sisters, who are engaged in big business. So Vincent Berry II is someone you should definitely check out. Now, I do want to kind of circle back to, this Obama letter. Right? Because before we go, I want to make sure that we've given everyone what they've tuned in for. This has been a fantastic discussion, by the way. I think that there's something significant about when this letter was written. This was in 1982. And so Obama at that time was 21 years old. And I know that there's different things that happen at different times for different people. And for some people, it's more than once. Once upon a time, I learned that from a woman who was very studied insofar as queer issues are concerned. She suggested to me that there was a scientific basis for the argument that sexuality is fluid and it changes throughout a person's life, or it can change, I should say, throughout a person's life. This was the same person that suggested to me, again, I don't know how true it is, but that males tend to fall on one end of the extreme of the sexual spectrum or the other. They're less likely to fall in the middle, and women are more likely to fall in the middle than men are. Right. And so that, you might find women that are less concerned about the rigid constructs of sexuality because they have some sort of aperture into the middle ground. whereas with men, it's less common. This is what I was told. And again, if you know better, please let me know. However, all of these things together reconciled suggests to me that a person might come to terms with their sexuality at different points. And with Obama being 21 at the point when he was writing this letter to this woman, I don't know if that is significant or insignificant. And I'd love to get your thoughts.
I think it's significant that he even took the journey. Let me put that out there first. Because most people don't take that journey and think about, they're not critical thinkings about their own lives. They just do and are. And most of us don't even deal with all of our feelings. Sometimes some of us get scared of our own feelings and we run from ourselves in different ways, right?
Right.
So, for him just to be in that moment at any age, is a powerful thing. So I think it's significant in putting a spotlight on him being, allowing himself the freedom to do that, even at 21. A lot of people encourage it to be that space to be available sooner than later.
Okay.
But at the same time, you can't define somebody's journey. I know 50-year-old gay men who didn't do anything until they were 50. They didn't even live a gay life. So I look at them like, man, I lived in my 20s. You in your 50s living it, but God bless you, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, so it just, the pendulum is very fluid and it's personal. That's the thing. It's very personal. So for him to do it in that moment when he did, it's significant because it's personal and he gave us a lens into his reality that we don't see especially as Black men.
Sure.
Even thinking about that.
So I want to read something, before we wrap up for today. This is another thing that he wrote. It says, "My mind is androgynous to a great extent, and I hope to make it more so until I can think in terms of people, not women as opposed to men. But in returning to the body, I see that I've been made a man, and physically in life, I choose to accept that contingency." And so to me, that means he's a very eloquent writer. That means that he's questioned who he is, accepted who he was born as. And as we know, he married Michelle 10 years later. They have 2 daughters. He went on to become the president. And, as far as I know, this is the only thing that has come out that has really connected him to any sort of narrative or conversation that could be considered queer or queer adjacent. And so I guess what I want to ask before we wrap up is, do you feel like this moment casts Obama in a different light? Does this change anything about President Obama?
Actually, for me, it does.
Okay, good.
It does.
Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I've admired the man simply because he became the president of the United States.
Sure.
But now I get to admire him now. Like, okay, you were able to get to this spot where you just were totally comfortable with your being as a Black man. And you explored every problem you had with yourself or question you had about yourself, and you had the space to do it. And you took that and constructed a Black man who became the president of a construct that nobody wanted your face to be. Now I know how you got there, because you're not just a strategic thinker, but you're thoughtful, you're mindful, and you knew where you wanted to be and where you didn't want to be. And you wanted to be able to represent all genders, men and women. Beyond that, that means he has the capacity to think about the trans issue and have, if anything, I have a higher expectation of him. You should be talking on the trans issue. Those trans men and women it's their moment to advance the cause around gender. My movement was queer, and totally sexual. But when you add that gender component of it, it makes everything very complicated. And the only way I could really get it together at my older age was to pull the two apart. You got to talk about gender, you have to separate it and talk about sex different, because when you combine them, I've worked in programs where it'd be 2 white trans women together when they were both at some point gay men. and now they're technically lesbians.
Mm.
And then as a program director at a community center, how do you create programs for that and not create space to understand it and to think differently? And so it's like a muscle. And then all of a sudden I'm meeting straight couple, stay together after man goes trans. Woman stays with man. Now it's a lesbian relationship. But all of that sprung from love at the end of the day.
Sure.
And that love transcended gender and sexuality.
So that's possible.
When you allow yourself to think that way, more queerly that way, it's not about being gay. It's just thinking differently. Then it turns into magic, because now people are conjuring up identity for themselves and maintaining core things like love in what they conjure. And that love's not appreciated because it's outside of the construct that's more comfortable to the people who want to maintain the construct for whatever reason.
Well,
I don't know if I even answered the question.
No. I think that's more than sufficient. I think that this certainly gives, again, a framework that we can use to digest these headlines and these articles that are being written about. I mean, I'm a big Obama fan, and I think you're absolutely right. If it does cast him in a different light, he is now not just a black icon, but hopefully he's a gay icon too. Why not be everybody's hero if you can, right?
I'm sure I'll get some pushback on that, but
hey, man, that's what people do. People take issue with stuff. I'm all about celebrating winning where I can. And so, I will continue to do so. I'd like to thank you very much for coming in and spending the time with us today, and giving our listeners and even me, especially me, some insight. I know on behalf of me and Q, we appreciate you coming up, and Chris as well. Once again, Johnny Jenkins is with us here. And again, a recent graduate from Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation's master's program with a degree in social justice. And I got to mention, of course, that your thesis focused on theorizing Black queer community wisdom in Detroit. I would love to have you back on the show again. I understand you're working on a show yourself, so as soon as you have that ready, I volunteer as tribute. If there's ever an episode where it makes sense for me as a guest, and again, I'd love for you to come back up. We'll
you're a brother and a scholar.
Hey man, I'm doing my best over here. And listen, as always, if you enjoyed today's episode and you got some feedback, you agree, you disagree, or you just want to, send over a couple of words, I'd love to hear from you. Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app, or of course you can reach out to me on all social media at Ramses Ja. Are you on social media by chance?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Plug your social media.
My website is the JyobaProject.com. Jyoba as in JYOBA.
Okay.
JYOBA. Jyoba-project.com.
Right.
And it's really just just who I am for the next 40 years.
All right.
This is what I do. This is who I am.
All right. Well, we'll be hearing a lot more from you. And again, we appreciate you stopping in. And for you, our listener, we appreciate you tuning in. And until next week, peace. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show is produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. Join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice, from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.